Okay, so another question I get asked is, what do I do for my commercial pilot license? So I'm going to make a quick video on how to obtain your commercial license here in Canada. And in case you weren't aware, getting your private pilot license is a prerequisite for getting your commercial pilot license. And I have made a video on this. You can go and watch it now if you haven't already. It covers things I will not cover in this video because it covers the fundamental resources you'll need to start out with. If you've already been licensed, you know what those are. So we're just going to continue on. And before we go any further, I think it's important that we just touch on what the privileges are when you get your commercial pilot license and what it means. In order to answer that question, we're going to go directly to the CARS, which explicitly tell you what you can do now that you have a commercial license, which means that you can act basically as a pilot and earn an income from that. What it does not include is you are not an air taxi, you are not an airline pilot, and you will not able to go and offer services like sell services for sightseeing flights. What you can do is you can work as pilot in command within a commercial operation. That's what you can do with your commercial pilot license. And on top of that, it's important to remember that you do have to maintain your Category 1 medical in order to exercise your privileges as a commercial pilot. Okay, so let's make a quick checklist of what you're going to need in order to get your commercial license. You're going to need a private pilot license. You cannot start your commercial training until you have a private pilot license. Then most people, what they do is they start with their night rating. Why not? It's extra training, and unlike in the US where you get your night rating with your license, here in Canada you don't. So you have to add a night rating on top of your private pilot license if you would like to fly at night. Of course, the Category 1 medical, and then you're going to have to study and write your commercial written exam. It also requires 80 hours of ground school. It's quite a lot of content, so you might want to get started on that. You have to pass your commercial pilot flight test, and you have to meet the hourly requirement for your commercial licensing. And we'll talk about that next. So what I'm going to do to tackle that is I'm first going to show you where you can find the requirements, the hourly requirements, in order to obtain a commercial pilot license. So not only do you have to do the written exam as well as pass a flight test, you also have to hit the minimum hourly requirements for your commercial private pilot license. Where you find that is you go to Standard 421 of the Canadian Aviation Regulations and scroll down to Division 7. That's where you're going to find what you need in order to qualify for a commercial pilot license. Now, this is a very simplified version of what you need for minimums in order to qualify for a fixed wing commercial pilot license. Okay, so you're going to need at least 200 hours in airplane in order to hit the minimum hourly requirement. Within that, you need 65 hours of post-private pilot training. Okay, and then 35 hours of that is supposed to be dual, the rest of it is solo, but a minimum of that 65 has to be 35 hours of dual, which includes 20 hours of instrument, 5 hours of night, and inclusive of that is 2 hours of cross-country night training, and then another 3 hours of any kind of cross-country training, day or night. You also are going to need at least 100 hours of pilot and command time, of which 20 hours are cross-country, and that is inclusive of your 300 nautical mile flight, which is another requirement of your commercial license. So there's a lot of components in here that overlap, but if you want to kind of back it up and do the most simplified version of what you need, this is kind of a good place to start. Now, a good thing about the commercial pilot licensing standards is that in that 200 hours, you actually have the flexibility to include things such as a multi-engine rating or an instrument rating, group 1, 2, or 3, and you can also include a seaplane rating. So when you get your commercial license, those minimum hours, the 200 hours, they can include all kinds of other training as long as you hit the minimum hours that are in that Division 7. So a lot of programs will overlap training in order to make it more cost effective for the student. So for example, I'm going to need X number of hours for my commercial. I might as well include an instrument rating. I might as well include a multi-engine rating, but they're not required in order to get your commercial license. As an example, I hold a commercial license, but I got my multi-engine rating after I got my commercial license. So you can include it before or after your training. It's just all in how you decide to package up your commercial training. This pie chart is an example of how you could basically package up your commercial training to hit the 200-hour minimum. So in this pie chart, I don't include, for example, an instrument rating, although it does show that you need that 20 hours of instrument training in your commercial license. So again, going back to Division 7 and reading what the minimum hourly requirements are, that's important, especially if you want to take ownership and control over your own commercial training. I will show you kind of like the minimums that you need as well as what you need, but it's very important for each pilot to be involved in their training and understand, oh, okay, so I've hit the minimums for this, that, and that, and then that way you kind of have better understanding of where you need to go and what you need to do in order to go for that commercial license. Going back to the two main things is the commercial written and the commercial flight test. Luckily, Transport does publish the guides that you need to review in order to make sure that you're hitting the metrics to qualify to A, pass the written, and B, pass the flight test. You're going to need your flight instructor to write you a recommend for both. If you purchase a commercial training program like an online ground school, typically, as long as you pass all of their exams, they will just give you that recommendation so that you don't need an instructor for that purpose. But for your flight test, you are going to have to work with an instructor in order to make sure that you get your recommend for that flight test, and they will only write that if you're able to basically pass the flight test. On that note, if you're interested in pursuing the commercial pilot license, I highly recommend that you go ahead and grab yourself a copy of the flight test guide for the commercial pilot license. It's not a secret, it is totally free, it's available online, and please read it. Otherwise, your flight instructor is going to have to spend a considerable amount of time getting you up to speed on what it is that you need to know. So go ahead and grab that guide, read it, and that'll give you a good fundamental understanding of what's to be expected on the flight test. A good way to think about the commercial flight test is it's very similar to your private pilot flight test with basically higher standards and a couple of other items thrown in, such as you have to demonstrate a spin and you have to demonstrate radio aids. So if you are thinking of, okay, what can I do to prepare for my commercial flight test? It's, like I said, very similar to your private pilot flight test. Read the guide and know what kind of metrics you're going to be expected to hit, and then plan for those, train for those, and make sure that you have all of the knowledge as required. This is, of course, where I'm going to insert my shameless plug, because if you subscribe to my channel and watch my videos, this is exactly what I try to do, is I try to give you all of the fundamentals so that you are well prepared going into something like a flight test, so that you can actually save money and save time studying by focusing on what you really need to know. Let's talk about obtaining an aircraft, because this actually gets a little bit fun, because you're not actually as restricted. Once you're licensed, the doors open for you to go to other places to get an aircraft in order to complete your training. And this is actually pretty fun because you can stay in the flight school world, and there's advantages to that because it's familiar, there's often instructors available, but the downside is that they can be very busy and it can be challenging to get bookings. I know that myself. It was hard to get a booking slot that was more than 2 hours, which really restricted how far I could go on my cross countries. So living in the flight school world to complete your commercial training is a really good environment, but it can be a restrictive environment. That being said, once you're licensed, I do highly recommend that you get involved with the general aviation community and with your local flight club. It kind of opens the doors to different kinds of aircraft. You can experience things like a different kind of if you're used to a Cessna, you can fly a low wing. It really kind of opens up the different aircraft that you can fly, but typically it requires a membership, and it would also require probably a checkout flight, sometimes on a regular basis, for insurance purposes. Another thing that you can do is you can rent from a private owner. That can be fun because you can actually learn about what it would be like to actually own an aircraft, and you can get more involved with owners and taking care of an airplane, just getting more involved with aviation generally. This is something that I did. I rented privately to complete some of my commercial training. The downsides are you do have to have a kind of a higher degree of care with regards to the aircraft, and you have to make sure that the insurance does cover you. Hopefully this helped you learn more about what you can do in order to get your commercial training done. Another piece of advice I would have for you is if you can buddy up with someone, it does help to keep the cost down. It also helps you to share the experience so that you can each share what you've learned in your training, and that actually helps you to retain more during your training, and you can kind of learn from each other. So I do recommend people buddying up if they can. Also, I'm going to say, hey, if this video helped you, help me by sharing this with other people so that I have less explaining to do, and you can help your fellow pilots advance their training sooner, because we all just, want to be better and more accomplished pilots at the end of the day. So thank you so much. And if you can, subscribe, because it certainly helps me out and I can make more content like this for you. Okay, great. Fly safe.